Where's the patient's husband? Why hasn't he come yet? If he doesn't sign soon, it'll be too late, a doctor urged. The patient's husband refuses to come. He said to let her fend for herself, a nurse replied. Fend for herself? When Susie Frost, battered and barely clinging to life on the operating table, heard those words, something inside her stirred. Summoning the last of her strength, she slowly raised her hand. Give me my phone. Seeing her condition, the nurse quickly handed her the phone. Enduring excruciating pain, Susie redialed the number that was almost etched into her brain. Just as the call was about to disconnect automatically, it finally went through. I already told you that her life or death is none of my business. The man on the other end spoke, his voice full of displeasure and impatience. Dylan. With every word Susie spoke, a searing pain shot through her body. After you took him away, the kidnappers detonated the bomb and I was hurt badly. Heh. Before she could finish, the man on the other end let out a cold, dismissive chuckle. Susie, your acting is really improving. That weak little voice almost sounds convincing. I'm not lying to you, I really am hurt. Is that so? His tone grew even more scornful. Then I wish you a speedy journey to hell. Dylan. Beep beep beep. Undeterred, Susie tried calling again. Sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable. The doctor, no longer able to stand by in silence, spoke gently. Miss Frost, your condition is very serious. If you have any other family members present, they're also authorized to sign on your behalf. What other family did she have? In this world, he was the only one who could sign the consent form. No matter how much it hurt, Susie fought back the tears that streamed down her pale cheeks and asked the doctor with a faint smile. Can I sign for myself? Yes. With her last ounce of strength, Susie signed the consent form for the surgery. The operation lasted 4 hours and was finally over, but her condition worsened 2 hours post-surgery, and Susie was moved to the ICU. For 24 hours, Susie lay in a coma, unable to open her eyes, but her mind was alert, and she could hear the nurses discussing as they changed her bandages. Even if the marriage is struggling, a husband can't just ignore his seriously injured wife. You wouldn't believe it, I called him several more times but it just kept going to voicemail. Doesn't he care even a little? Lamented the nurse. Here's some juicy gossip for you. The CEO of Wright Corporation, Dylan Wright, who's rumored to be disinterested in women and hasn't married even at 30, actually has a girlfriend, and she's hospitalized right here in our hospital. He's taking care of her around the clock in the VIP ward on the top floor. It's strange how different men can be. One boyfriend is incredibly devoted, and another is worse than an animal. Little did she know, Dylan was so close, merely an inquiry away from knowing that Susie hadn't lied to him. Yet he refused to waste a moment on her simply because she wasn't worth it. Her eyes, tightly shut, suddenly flew open, startling the nurse who was wiping her face. You're awake. Once awake, Susie was immediately given a thorough checkup and, finding no serious injuries, was moved to a regular room. That night, deep in the silence despite still being confined to her bed, Susie removed her oxygen mask and dragged her injured left leg, wounded in the explosion, to the top floor. Outside the hospital room, through the glass, Susie watched as Dylan tenderly fed and Wheeler fruits by her bedside. Her fists tightened, but the anguish in her chest, like a swarm of needles pricking at her heart, didn't ease in the slightest. 3 days ago, Susie and Ann had been kidnapped together. Knowing how important Ann was to him, and despite their rivalry, Susie had fiercely protected her. For 2 days and nights, Susie was tortured by the kidnappers, bearing injuries all over her body, while Ann only suffered minor superficial wounds. Finally, Dylan came. I choose to save Ann. As for Susie, do as you please. He was not only unconcerned about Susie but even suspected that the kidnapping was a drama she had orchestrated herself. He had never trusted her. The intimate scene in the hospital room turned Susie's eyes, once filled with love, utterly cold. It's time to end this. The moment Susie turned to leave, Dylan felt something stir and whirled around, just as Ann let out a pained cry. Dylan quickly asked, "What's wrong?" and glanced at the door and then gave Dylan a weak smile. I accidentally pulled at my wound. Do you need a doctor? I'm not that frail, Ann replied teasingly. But Mr. Dylan, you should head back. You've been with me day and night. Susie must be upset again. She paused. Mr. Dillon, honestly, Susie isn't wrong. No matter what our relationship was in the past, you are now her husband. No woman could tolerate her husband being so kind to another woman, so whatever she does is understandable. Don't be angry with her, otherwise Madame Grace might hear of it. Dillon cut her off. It's getting late, you should sleep. Mr. Dillon. Listen to me. All right then. As Anne closed her eyes, Dillon glanced once more towards the door. Was it really? He remembered the weak voice on the phone that day. His lips tightened and he stood up, just as he moved, and grabbed his hand. Mr. Dillon, my wound still hurts a bit. Could you blow on it for me? A flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes before Dillon finally replied in a deep voice. All right. Susie didn't return to her room but left the hospital directly. A taxi took her back to the villa where she had lived with Dillon for 3 years. As she walked inside from the front gate, memories of the past 3 years with Dillon flooded back like a tidal wave. It had been a blend of sour, bitter, and spicy moments in their life together. But sweetness was conspicuously absent. Dillon had always believed that Susie married him as part of a calculated scheme. In truth, he wasn't entirely wrong. Susie had indeed manipulated events to marry him, but her motives were never what he assumed. She wasn't after his wealth or status. She was after the man himself. She had hoped that time would prove her true intentions, but 3 years had only intensified his disdain for her. She could never forget his cruel words. Then I wish you a speedy journey to hell. Dillon, you might not realize it, but I've actually been living in hell all along. These past 3 years I tried to climb out to be normal, to be by your side, but you clearly didn't care. Since that's the case, I'll grant your wish. Taking what she needed and discarding what she didn't, Susie left behind only the signed divorce papers and the keys to the villa. She walked away without a trace of longing, leaving nothing behind. The next morning, after spending yet another night at the hospital because Anne's pain had kept her from letting him leave, Dillon was finally on his way to the office. As they approached an intersection, he suddenly instructed the driver, "Take me to Bayview Heights." He had been wearing the same clothes for 2 days and needed a change. Otherwise, he wasn't too keen on returning to that place. Upon arriving at the villa, instead of the warm welcome he might have expected, he was met with an eerie silence and a chilling sight on the living room table: a divorce agreement. Dillon's gaze lingered on the signed divorce papers and the keys resting on top. With an unreadable expression, he paused for a moment before turning and heading upstairs. This was his first time entering Susie's room. They usually lived separate lives, like oil and water, never mixing. The room was as clean and orderly as he expected. Over the past 3 years, she had personally taken care of his every need. It was hard to deny that in some ways she had been a competent wife. Realizing his thoughts, Dillon's brows furrowed, and he stepped forward to open her wardrobe. Clothes and jewelry, everything related to the right family, were still there. Just as she had written in the divorce papers, she had left without taking anything, leaving with nothing but the clothes on her back. So her cries of impending death that day, were they all just an act? He sneered. "Susie, I'm curious to see what game you're playing this time." His phone rang. Pulling it from his pocket and seeing the caller ID, a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes, a feeling he might not have even noticed himself. "What is it?" On the other end, his assistant sounded particularly anxious. "Sir, Miss Wheeler has had an accident." His brow tightened immediately. "I'm on my way." At the hospital, although bodyguards were posted at the entrance and surveillance revealed no suspicious individuals, and had somehow been poisoned and was in critical condition. Anne's primary doctor speculated, "Mr. Wright, it's highly likely that Miss Wheeler was poisoned before she even arrived at the hospital," and cut off the doctor before he could finish. "Mr. Dillon, please don't blame Susie. She was just trying to protect her marriage. If I had listened to her and left you as she suggested, none of this would have happened. So this is all my own fault. At a time like this, you should be worried about yourself, not that ruthless woman," Dillon replied sharply. His eyes hardened as he pulled out his phone to call Susie. "I'm sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable." The fury in his eyes could have swallowed someone whole. He coldly ordered his assistant, who was standing by, search the entire city for Susie. Meanwhile, at Hillside Villa, Ashu. As soon as Susie entered, she sneezed, causing Alan Wheeler, who followed her in, to become instantly anxious. "Boss, did you catch a cold?" Sniffling slightly, Susie sneezed again. "It's nothing. You've sneezed twice. You definitely have a cold." Alan set down Susie's luggage and hurried to the kitchen. "I need to make you some ginger tea right away." Watching Alan's worried and hurried back, Susie thought of Dylan's cold words. "I already told you that her life or death is none of my business." People who cared about her would worry over something as small as a sneeze. Those who didn't wouldn't have flinched even if they saw her hanging. They'd think she was just swinging. 3 years ago, she had done everything to marry Dylan, to repay a perceived debt. She had toned down her personality and humbled herself to the dust, working tirelessly. Thinking back, she realized she must have been out of her mind. Even if he had saved her 3 years ago, it was her first time and he really wasn't at a loss. The notion that she owed him anything was utterly absurd. Pushing down the pain in her heart, Susie stopped Alan at the kitchen door. "Forget the ginger tea. However, the Goodwin family in North Avenue could use your help as a facilitator." "The Goodwin family?" Susie's eyes narrowed slightly. "The murderer who killed my parents, and my own attacker 3 years ago, might both be connected to the Goodwin family." Upon hearing this, Alan's eyebrows furrowed deeply. The Goodwins are influential in politics, and it seems the player behind the scenes is bigger than we imagined. Martin Goodwin, the head of the Goodwin family, has been ill lately, searching for a renowned doctor. "I'll pass on the news that you are the miracle doctor to them soon." 10 minutes later, Alan told Susie, "Boss, the Goodwin family needs you urgently. They want you to come as soon as possible, but your injuries." In fact, the moment Alan saw Susie, he wanted to ask about her injuries and where she had been these past 3 years. Since she was alive, why hadn't she contacted them? But she never mentioned it, and knowing her temperament, he didn't dare pry. Susie knew Alan was worried about her, but she didn't want to bring up anything related to Dylan with anyone. It was all over and she would never contact him in the future. There was simply no need to let them know. Yet, saying nothing would certainly not ease his concerns. After a moment, she explained to Alan, "I took care of a dog for 3 years, but it never grew tame. It bit me instead." Alan's anger flared immediately. "Where is that beast? I'll knock his teeth out." No one could harm his boss and get away with it. "He's dead. Dead in her heart. Tell the Goodwin family that I'll be there 2 days from now, for in the afternoon." 2 days passed in a blink. At Wright Corporation in the CEO's office, Dylan looked up as his assistant, Desmond Hill, entered. "Didn't find her?" "There isn't a doctor who knows how to treat the poisoning," Desmond said hesitantly, then added, "As for Mrs. Wright, she's an orphan with no family. Everything she's done over the past 3 years has been connected to you, and nothing suspicious has come up, so we haven't been able to locate her either." It had been 2 days. Was she intentionally hiding, or could she have? Realizing he was actually worried about her, Dylan's brows knitted together. Intensify the search. Yes. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Dylan gazed into the distance, his eyes flickering with a complexity even he hadn't noticed. "Susie, you better pray you can hide forever." "Sir." Desmond, who had left just a minute earlier, hurried back in without even knocking, breathless with urgency. "Look at this." Dylan, thinking there might be news of Susie, took the phone and saw Red Falcon, a miracle doctor in the alternative medicine world. Desmond exclaimed excitedly, "She's renowned for curing all kinds of poisons and diseases. People call her the healer of legends, known for treating even the most severe injuries. She disappeared 3 years ago, and everyone thought she was gone for good, but now she's reappeared. I've just received reliable information that today at 4 in the afternoon, she'll be visiting the Goodwin family in North Avenue to treat Mr. Martin. Sir, perhaps Miss Wheeler could try her treatment." The Goodwin family at North Avenue. The fact that the Goodwins had called upon her was proof enough of her skill. "Go invite her." After a pause, Dylan stopped Desmond at the door. "I'll go myself." North Avenue was an hour-and-a-half drive from South Avenue. Susie arrived at the Goodwin family's estate as promised in disguise. Using the pretense of treating an illness, she took the opportunity to hypnotize Martin. Unfortunately, she didn't manage to extract any useful information as she left, deep in thought. A sudden pain shot through her forehead as she bumped into someone. Sorry? The apology got stuck in her throat the moment she recognized the face. Dylan? What was he doing here? It was truly a case of enemies crossing paths in the most unexpected of places. In less than 2 seconds, Susie tore her gaze away and walked off, her expression completely indifferent. Dylan stood there, confused. She was about to apologize to him, so why did her attitude change the moment she saw him? Especially how she suddenly looked at him. It was as if they were mortal enemies. Dylan turned, watching the direction she went, his eyes narrowing. That figure looked just like Susie. Mr. Wright, we're so honored by your presence. I'm sorry for not greeting you properly. The voice of the Goodwin family's butler snapped Dylan out of his thoughts. By the time he glanced back, the woman had disappeared. Following the butler to see Martin, Dylan found the old man looking healthy, his complexion rosy, as if fully recovered from his illness. Dylan wasted no time and stated his reason for coming, but the reply was unexpected. The miracle doctor had just left, barely moments ago. Dylan was speechless. The woman he had run into earlier, the one with freckles all over her face, was she the miracle doctor? Knowing it was already too late to chase after her, Dylan quickly bid farewell to Martin. To his surprise, the woman hadn't left yet. Seeing her car just start to pull away, Dylan hurried over. Wait a sec. But his words were drowned out by the roar of the engine. Damn it! Now he was almost certain this woman had something against him. He quickly got into his car and chased after her. As soon as Susie saw the black luxurious car speeding after her in the rearview mirror, her brow furrowed. Did he recognize her? She wasn't bragging, but her disguise was so flawless that not even her parents, if they were alive, would be able to recognize her. And Dylan, after 3 years of marriage, he had barely ever looked at her properly. So why was he chasing her so relentlessly? Just because she hadn't apologized earlier? With a cold smirk tugging at her lips, Susie floored the gas pedal. You owe me a lot more than I owe you. The red Maserati shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Interesting. Dylan's eyes narrowed as he accelerated. The red car and the black one sped through the winding mountain roads, like two fierce predators locked in a relentless chase. At first, Dylan was confident in his driving skills. He was a man, after all. How could he not catch up to a woman? But in the final stretch, the woman suddenly did a sharp U-turn and drove straight toward him. He quickly jerked the steering wheel to the right, barely avoiding a collision. However, the speed was too fast, and his car skidded into the mountainside. Though he wasn't hurt, his car stalled out through the windshield. His eyes met hers. She flashed him a playful smile, then gave him a thumbs down, taunting him with a level of arrogance that sent his blood boiling. Moments later, she reversed her car with impressive speed, leaving him in the dust. Red Falcon. She wasn't just a miracle doctor. She was also an ace racer. Although she wasn't good-looking, her talents were undeniable. But why did she harbor such animosity toward him? Back at the office, the first thing Dylan did was instruct Desmond, dig into everything you can find on Red Falcon, leave no detail out. He had to find out what he'd done to make her so mad at him. Half an hour later, Desmond returned with a defeated expression. Sir, all the information on Red Falcon is locked behind a heavily encrypted firewall. We've switched through several tech experts, but none of them have been able to break in. Send me the link. Boss, someone's digging into your files. Alan handed his laptop to Susie, who was lounging on the couch watching a show. It started about half an hour ago. They've cycled through a few people and the latest one is pretty skilled. I'm having a hard time keeping them at bay. Is that so? Susie's eyes narrowed and she sat up. Let me handle this. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code flashing rapidly on the screen. Within minutes, she closed the laptop and tossed it back onto the couch, stretching lazily. Let's go grab something to eat. Meanwhile, back at his desk, Dylan stared at the screen in disbelief as the code on his computer spelled out one word: loser. He nearly smashed the computer in frustration, watching the taunting word flash on the screen and feeling the stormy tension building around Dylan. Desmond didn't dare breathe too loudly. Their boss hacking skills were top tier, not just in South Avenue but globally, so how could this happen? Noticing Dylan's darkening expression, Desmond hesitated for a moment before offering a timid suggestion. Sir, they probably don't know it's you, so I'm sure they didn't mean it personally. Get out. Yes, sir. Wait. Dylan stopped Desmond as he was about to leave. Use the contact information the Goodwins provided. offer her $10 million for the treatment. The main goal was to get her to cure Anne's poisoning. Everything else was secondary. A shadow flickered in Dylan's eyes as he quickly formulated his next move. Just as the food was being placed on the table, Alan's phone rang. It was from an unfamiliar number. He glanced across the table at Susie, who nodded, signaling him to answer. He pressed the speakerphone button as he picked up. "Is this the miracle doctor, Red Falcon?" It was Desmond. Susie's hand froze mid-motion as she was about to pick up her fork. Was Dylan really that determined to get an apology from her? Naturally, Dylan, who had never tasted defeat, couldn't swallow his pride after being repeatedly taunted by her. Not wanting to get further entangled with him, Susie motioned for Alan to hang up. "I'm sorry, you've got the wrong person." Just as Alan was about to end the call, Desmond quickly interjected. "Wait, please. I have a patient who desperately needs the miracle doctor's help. We're willing to offer $10 million as payment for the treatment." Susie paused, her expression unreadable. So that was the real reason behind Dylan's relentless pursuit. Their encounter at the Goodwin family estate hadn't been a coincidence after all. For Dylan to personally reach out and offer such a high fee, concerned that it might involve Grace Lawson, Dylan's grandmother, who had always been kind to her, Susie used lip movements to instruct Alan to ask for more details. Alan asked, "Can you provide some basic information about the patient? You can send it to my phone." Hearing some progress, Desmond eagerly replied, "Of course, I'll send it right away." As soon as the call ended, Desmond sent over all the relevant details. The moment Susie saw that the patient was Anne, she casually tossed the phone back to Alan. "Tell them I don't treat for money. I believe in destiny, and this patient is not fated to meet me." Alan blinked in confusion and thought, "Since when do you have such rules?" Though Alan sensed something off about Susie's expression, he didn't ask any questions. Instead, he simply relayed her message to Desmond. Upon receiving the response, Desmond immediately reported Susie's message to Dylan. Dylan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Add another $10 million. He couldn't believe she'd turned down that much money. Susie sneered. $20 million? A twisted urge suddenly gripped her. She wanted to test just how much Dylan truly valued, and her eyes narrowed slyly. "Tell them I'll make a house call for $200 million. Not a penny less." $200 million? Dylan barely hesitated. "Deal." 3 years ago, after being drugged during an ambush, a girl saved his life despite being seriously injured herself. After a night together, the girl disappeared by morning. It had been too dark that night to see her face clearly, but he vaguely remembered a faint, distinctive scent on her, like some kind of herbal remedy. After investigating, he traced it back to the Wheeler family, and had been frail and sickly since childhood, and had relied on natural remedies for years. According to her, on the day he was attacked, she was kidnapped and managed to escape. Along the way, she encountered him. Ignoring her own safety, she dragged her wounded body and gave herself to him to save his life. At the time, she was only 18, and saved his life, and he promised her marriage. Even though his grandmother, Grace, disapproved, he vowed never to marry anyone else. Yet out of nowhere, Susie showed up. She orchestrated a heroic act, earning Grace's favor, and step by step, manipulated Grace into forcing him to marry her. With her goal achieved, Susie saw Anne as a thorn in her side, constantly picking fights. Lately, things had escalated, first a kidnapping and now poisoning. $200 million or even more. As long as someone was willing to help save, and he'd pay any price. He owed Anne too much. Meanwhile, Alan immediately informed Susie after receiving a response. "Boss, they've agreed." He agreed. It was impossible not to feel something. After all, she had loved Dylan for so many years. She couldn't help but wonder, if it were her who was poisoned, would he do the same? No, he wouldn't. He'd wish for her death as soon as possible. That way, no one would stand in the way of him and ever again. Susie clenched her fists, suppressing the aching pain in her heart. Deal. It was $200 million. Since he was foolish and rich, why shouldn't she take advantage of it? But who exactly poisoned Anne? What was the motive? And as for the previous kidnapping, after investigating all this while, there was still no answer. There must be a connection somewhere. It seemed a visit to the hospital tonight was necessary, to first determine the exact poison in Anne's system before following the clues. That night, when all was quiet, Susie, dressed in a nurse uniform prepared by Alan, sneaked into Anne's hospital room. The girl on the bed had a ghostly pale face and weak breathing. Dylan would probably be heartbroken seeing her like this. It was said that Anne had once saved Dylan, which was why he held her dear. In fact, they were quite similar. Susie also fell in love with Dylan on the night he saved her. A self-mocking smile curled her lips. Susie had schemed to marry him, thinking he was single. After all, rumors had it that he was indifferent to women and devoted only to his work, to the extent that his grandmother who raised him suspected he was gay. It was only after marriage that Susie found out he had a girl he liked. It was just that Grace did not approve of Anne, so she never mentioned Anne in front of Susie. 3 years ago, while Susie thought she was using Grace, wasn't Grace actually using her too? Remembering that shrewd old lady, Susie chuckled softly. Age certainly does sharpen the wit. Not wanting to waste more time, Susie reached out to check Anne's condition. Her brows furrowed instantly. Her condition appeared to be. Indeed it was. Her expression suddenly changed. Susie pulled out a syringe from her pocket, aimed the needle at a vein in Anne's left arm, and was about to insert it when her hand was suddenly grabbed. Using all her strength and clutched the intruder's wrist. Who sent you? The medical staff in and out of this hospital room were carefully selected, and Anne knew each one well. The moment she saw the person in front of her, she knew something was off. Unimpressed by Anne's awakening, Susie shook off her hand and continued her previous action. As the sharp needle tip was about to pierce into her arm, Anne suddenly pushed Susie and quickly sat up from the bed, reaching for the call button by the bedside. However, before she could touch it, her arm was pinned against the wall. Though most of the intruder's face was hidden by a mask, the chilling glare from her eyes was like a sword laced with murderous intent, and became even more panicked. I am Dylan's most beloved woman. If you dare hurt me, he will never forgive you. Slap. After slapping Anne, Susie grabbed her chin. If you don't want to die, keep quiet. Her face stung from the slap, and her jaw felt like it was about to be crushed. However, from the intruder's words, it seemed she wasn't here to kill her. Anne's fear slightly subsided, and she stopped struggling. Seeing her finally quiet down, Susie released her chin. After drawing the blood with the needle and finishing her task, Susie removed the needle and left, not caring about the still bleeding puncture site. Having suffered such a grievance, and was not about to let it go, she quickly pressed the call button. Someone is trying to kill. Before she could finish, her throat was grabbed. The woman's speed was alarmingly fast, shocking Anne. I didn't want to kill you. Susie's fingers tightened inch by inch around her neck. But since you seem tired of living, I'll grant your wish. This wasn't just a threat. Susie genuinely intended to kill Anne. Indeed, Anne was no saint. She was quite skilled in manipulating situations. Over the past 3 years she had framed others multiple times. Susie had been patient only because Anne was Dylan's favorite. Now, she didn't care about who he loved. Furthermore, Anne owed Susie that much. If it hadn't been for her protection, Anne wouldn't have survived long enough for Dylan to rescue her from the kidnappers. Seeing Anne's face turn red with difficulty breathing and veins popping on her forehead, the murderous intent in Susie's eyes deepened. Just a bit more pressure and Anne's life would be over. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps approached. They were distant, inaudible to most, but Susie, with her exceptional hearing, could hear them clearly. It was Dylan. She felt a bit disgusted by how familiar she was with his steps. As the footsteps grew closer, Susie's gaze hardened, and with a swift motion, she knocked Anne unconscious with a sharp blow to the neck. After all, Anne was worth $200 million. There was no reason to turn down that kind of money. Shifting her gaze slightly, Susie quickly opened the door to the balcony and then slipped into the bathroom. The next second, the door was pushed open. Dylan entered, his eyes falling on the open sliding door to the balcony. His brows furrowed as he instructed Desmond, who followed behind him. Close the door. His words were cut off by a startled cry. Ah! Anne, who had thought she was doomed, suddenly opened her eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling, gasping for air in terror. Did I wake you? I've been too busy these last few days to visit. How are you feeling? Dylan walked to the bedside, noticing her distressed expression. Did you have a nightmare? Turning and seeing Dylan, and immediately threw herself into his arms, showing him the marks on her neck and the needle mark on her arm. Mr. Dillon, just now, a woman disguised as a nurse drew my blood and then tried to strangle me.